Done.
Thank you very much, Larry. That's great. Right. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for all coming along. Obviously, we did lots of these talks a few years ago when no one was allowed out and about, and we haven't done so much of them. But I think we thought people seem to quite enjoy them, and particularly now the nights are drawing in and the weather's got awful. Who wants to be out now? So we thought we'd put on sort of a few events over the winter that people can go to without having to get out in their car late at night when it's cold and wet and dreary. So it's going to be the first of a few talks, I dare say. First, I have to say this is funded by the Resilient Communities Fund at NRW funded. So thank you to them for funded various events we've done throughout the year, and there's still more to come, including a fungi walk, which I shall mention later. But this is Gwent's autumn wildlife. So here we go. So summer sadly over, although maybe just a week ago summer wasn't over. Summer was very much here, but it's in a very short time it's definitely become autumn now. So it's quite apt that we're having this talk today, because it's windy and wet and very, very autumn-like. But tonight we're going to talk about sort of the wildlife that's disappearing, but also as wildlife disappears and wildlife arrives, and sort of discussing what it means for our resident wildlife, because some things can go away to warmer climes, but a lot of wildlife is here and has to sort of cope with what's coming. So autumn, I think it used to be my favorite time of year, but now definitely spring is my favorite time of year. So autumn's probably my second favorite, or maybe third. I quite like the summer as well if it gets too hot, but autumn quite often means death, colder days, less daylight. So you may think there's nothing to like about it, but obviously there's lots to be said for autumn. So there's lots of new things happening. Changing the seasons keeps things interesting. So admitting someone there. So we're going to sort of see what's happening at the moment. And so if anyone's got any questions, by the way, probably best if you stick it in the chat, and then Larry will pick it up from the chat and relay it to me, and then I shall hopefully answer the questions, but nothing too tricky, please. So summer's gone. However, we can still have balmy autumn days, as we did only about a week or so ago, and equally you can turn up fierce storms. I think we've had fierce storms today. We've got fierce storms again tomorrow. It's obviously quite a contrast for our wildlife to contend with. So there's still butterflies, there's still insects about at the moment. One day it's lovely for them, other days it's sort of horrendous. But they all have sort of various strategies. Some wildlife's migrating away from us at the moment. Some will be thinking about hibernating, and some of it will just be hunkering down and getting on with it. So tonight we're going to look at migrants departing, autumn, a time of plenty, migrants arriving, fungi, late season flowers and insects, and hibernation. So I think I've already gone over this. So Q&A, yep, just stick any questions you've got in the chat. We'll pick them up and try and answer them. So our summer visitors departing. So some of our summer visitors are actually long gone. So all the cuckoos were probably gone sometime in August. The swifts were about the last thing to arrive and about the first things to go. Sort of all the swifts maybe a month ago all just disappeared. It always amazes me how they're all flying about screaming, then almost overnight, round about mid-August, all absolutely gone. Things like the willow warblers, the last few of them will be disappearing. Most of them are probably gone. But for others, it's really sort of peak migration season. Sort of swallows and house martins, chiffchaffs, blackcaps, they'll all sort of be migrating through now. So our ones will be leaving. There'll be ones from further north will be passing through, but they'll all be heading sort of further down, sort of through Mediterranean down to Africa. Although increasingly, I think it was last winter, maybe the winter before, a few swallows sort of stayed with us. Quite a lot of chiffchaffs stay with us now. And certainly quite a few blackcaps now winter in the country, but they're generally ones who've come from Europe to winter with us. And then our blackcaps have sort of headed down to Spain and Africa. So So here's a swallow. It was probably only about a week and a half ago I saw a swallow's nest that still had baby swallows in. So I dare say some swallows are probably migrating, but there's still some swallows probably just about leaving nests now. So they're going to have to very quickly sort of feed up, and it seems a bit mad, really. Just sort of a tiny little baby in the nest, and then all of a sudden, within a few days, it's like you got to get yourself to Africa kind of thing. So I don't really know any statistics on whether the swallows that sort of fledged in June time or July time do better than the ones that are fledging now. But I think it's got to be quite difficult for a swallow that just fledges now to sort of suddenly have to get themselves all the way back down to Africa. But yet they seem to manage it. Here's a chiff chaff here again. They're sort of a lot of them migrating at the moment. This one looking very autumnal, so been with all the hawthorn berries, and black caps that I mentioned as well. A lot of them are migrating through at the moment. But as I said, some of our ones will probably all migrate off, but other ones will migrate in from places like Germany and actually spend the winter with us. So I think there's one thing in the chat there. Oh, there we go. From Lynn, is it wise to reduce the amount you feed birds so they get used to finding their own sources of food? So generally, I don't feed the birds at all over the summer, and it's generally probably about this time of year that I start feeding them. But there's various schools of thought in this. I've heard some people say, you should feed them all throughout the summer, because obviously there's a huge demand for food over the summer because they've got all their babies to feed. But I tend to sort of leave them to find their own food, and particularly the young, they want to be eating. They don't want to really be eating sort of seeds and stuff. They want to be eating sort of juicy caterpillars and stuff over the summer. But certainly in the winter, I do feed them. But I think once you start feeding them, you want to sort of feed them all throughout the winter, because I'm sure it's not good to like feed them all the way through October, November, December, and they get really reliant on it. Then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, you stop feeding them and they've become really habituated to coming to your feeder. Then all of a sudden, on some cold, wet January day, they've suddenly got to find a different source. So personally, I think it is good to feed them, but it's probably very good to make sure if you're going to put your feeders out soon, sort of make sure they're really clean, because I kind of think we wouldn't be eating off dirty plates and the like, and if you have really dirty feeders, sort of diseases can spread throughout them. So it's probably a good time of year now to give you. Yes, as some clarification there. Yes, you could, as you say there. Lynn says maybe don't start feeding them quite yet, because there's still lots of seeds and berries around. You could start sort of feeding in mid-October when there isn't anything. There's probably no harm in starting feeding now, because they're not really needing caterpillars and the like for their young at the moment. But yeah, if you started feeding now or sort of mid-October and then fed throughout the winter, but yeah, make sure you clean, your feeders are all nice and clean, otherwise diseases get spread around. So insect numbers are dwindling, but I'm saying here there's lots of berries about at the moment. I've got a rowan in my front garden. It's absolutely full of berries, and there's hawthorn everywhere. The hazelnuts are just ripening, and there's blackberries everywhere. So it is a bit of a time of plenty at the moment if you like berries and seeds to eat. But obviously species such as swallows and the like, they don't eat berries and seeds, and that's why they're having to disappear off to warmer climes. But species such as, say, the blackcap that we just saw, all summer that is feeding on insects, but they're sort of more adaptable, and they'll happily eat berries now. So that's why they can sort of probably migrate a bit later, and some of them can actually spend the winter with us. So with a whole selection here of all the things that are on offer in our sort of hedgerows and woodlands at the moment. So we got I'll probably go through all of these. From top left, we got alder cones. they're probably not open yet, but later on in the autumn they open, and particularly things like siskins and redpolls and the like, really like them. Then you got Guelder Rose there, then hawthorn. So all the thrushes will be arriving soon, feasting on all the hawthorn berries. Then we've got the holly, and top right we've got dogwood, and we've got the blackberries there. And then we've got my favourite berries, which are the spindle, sort of the pink berries that open with these beautiful sort of golden orange seeds inside, and then field maple, then acorns there, which the jays will be feeding on a lot. And then we've got a privet there in the middle right, and then there's a yew berries down the bottom left, which are, the actual seed is hugely poisonous, but the berry that goes around it is good eating for birds. And then we've got hazelnuts there, which things like the dormice love. And then we've got sloes there. We've got the blackthorn, which people will be collecting fairly soon to make their sloe gin. So I think generally you probably collect that, I think, after the first frost, if you want to make sloe gin, because it needs the berry to have been frozen once to make it split, so all the sort of colours come out. Or you can collect them and stick them in the freezer to do the same job before you make your sloe gin. But obviously make sure there's enough left for the wildlife as well. And then we've got wayfaring tree, and then in the bottom right is a rowan. So there really is a huge selection of food available for our wildlife at the moment. And then we've got migrants arriving. Just as migrants are leaving, we've got a whole lot of migrants sort of arriving with us as well. So we've got lots of thrushes arrive, lots of finches, lots of waders, lots of wildfowl. So we have thrushes with us during the summer, and we have finches and waders and all with us, but a huge lot more arrive sort of to spend the sort of Welsh autumn and winter with us. We might think it's cold and unpleasant, but it's a lot better than sort of the Arctic and Scandinavia where they've spent their summer. Obviously they've gone there for the summer because it's almost 24 hours daylight. It's a great place to sort of bring up little baby birds. But this time of year, the nights are drawing in, it's getting cold, so they've got to move on. So sort of the classic ones to arrive are this is the redwing. You can see the sort of reddy orange under its wing, which gets its name from, and very distinctive eye stripe there. But probably the first ones of them will be arriving any day soon. It's generally sort of October before they really start properly arriving. And then if you're going for a walk sort of in October, November at night time, and it's a nice still night, just listen out for this thin sort of seep sound, and that's all the redwings sort of migrating overhead. You generally don't hear many sort of birds at night, but you can hear these redwings sort of flying over, kind of thing. It's always nice, always a nice sound to hear. And I always quite like the idea that they've took off somewhere north and they're just flying over at dark. Yeah, we can't see them, but it's all this is kind of happening sort of under cover of darkness. And then along with the redwing comes the other sort of classic sort of autumn winter thrush, which is the fieldfare. You tend to see them more sort of migrating during the day, and they're sort of a bit of a bigger bird, really noisy, making a sort of chacking call, and they really like to sort of invade our sort of orchards. And but generally there's plenty of fruit for everybody, and they go for like the windfall on the ground, as this one here is. And so a really sort of great sight to see a huge mixed flock of redwing and fieldfare sort of marauding across the countryside from orchard to orchard, or from sort of berry rich hedgerow to berry rich hedgerow. But also we have their sort of thrushes they're not here during the summer, but also lots of things like the familiar song thrushes and blackbirds, which we have with us during the summer. Lots more of them arrive as well. We don't notice them as much because they're here anyway, but we have a lot more of them in the winter than we do in the summer. And again, they're here for the berries and the like. But generally, even sort of in the autumn, they'd much prefer to be eating eating probably worms in the fields than they would be eating berries. But it's when it gets that little bit colder and the ground freezes over and they can't get at the worms, that's when they sort of get on the berries. And then if it gets really cold, then they get forced into our gardens. So generally, if we have like a spell of cold weather, sort of late autumn, early winter, that's when things like the redwing and the fieldfare can actually start appearing in people's gardens and the like. And then we get lots of sort of finches appear for the winter as well. So there's chaffinch there up in the top left, and then goldfinch. Both of them, obviously, we have lots of them in the summer anyway, but a load more coming in the winter. And then in the top right, we have a brambling, a close relative of the chaffinch there. But they're not with us during the summer. So that's a classic one that just arrives with us in the autumn and spends the winter. Then down in the bottom left, we have a redpoll with its little red mark on its forehead. And then in the middle on the bottom, we have hawfinches, which it's quite a rare sighting to see a hawfinch, but it must have been, I don't know, it was about 2016. There was a huge eruption of hawfinches, and they were everywhere. But generally they're sort of very, very sort of scarce bird. But as a breeding bird, sort of the Wye Valley is one of the 5 real important sites for hawfinches in the UK. So in Gwent, we've got a special population of hawfinches, and that does get supplemented by more migrants in the autumn and the winter. And then in the bottom right, we have siskins, which a bird that's doing sort of really well because they quite like it. So they like the older cone. They also like a lot of the seeds you get in sort of coniferous plantations. So their numbers have done really well in recent years as sort of coniferous plantations have matured. And a lot more of them are appearing in people's gardens now as well. It's quite rare to get a siskin in your garden, but now generally if you're feeding the birds, quite often you get the sort of siskins in on the seeds as well. And then sort of at the coast, we get huge numbers of waders and wildfowl spend the winter with us. Like the Severn Estuary is sort of, it's a triple SI and an SAC, European protected, and SPA as well, special protection area. So it's sort of international importance, the Severn Estuary, and huge numbers of waders spend the winter there, sort of coming again down from a lot of these waders breed up in the Arctic. And I would think it's quite mad. They've probably never seen a human up there if they were born there, kind of thing, just out on the sort of tundra. And then all of a sudden they arrive down here, and there's like people everywhere. And I kind of wonder what they sort of make of it all, to be honest. But sort of a winter sort of walk down on the Severn Estuary, autumn walk, there'll be loads of waders, but you have to go at the right time because second highest tidal reach in the world. So if you go at low tide, the tide is about 2 miles out, and consequently all the waders are way out on the mud. So if you time your walk, so just as the tide's coming in, approaching high tide, then you get all the waders pushed up near the seawall, sort of down on the levels in the Severn Estuary, and it can be quite a spectacle. So we got here, this is I think this is down near our reserve at Peterston Went Lug. So there you see the tide's quite high in there, and that's a big flock of dunlin and knot, I think there. There's a few shell duck just stood on the mud as well, but you can get huge big swirling flocks of waders if you sort of time it right this time of year and into the winter. Well worth heading down. And as I said, as well as the waders, there's loads of wildfowl as well. So things like the teal in the top left, and the pintail top right, and the shoveler bottom left, and the widgeon bottom right. We may have just the odd shoveler might stay and breed, but generally all these species of duck, they're all sort of in Russia, Scandinavia, up in the Arctic Circle breeding. And then it starts to get a bit cold, and they this time of year they're heading down towards us. And generally they've molted before they migrate. They arrive with us looking absolutely sort of picture perfect, sort of immaculate, sort of in breeding plumage. I think over the winters when they sort of pair up and then head back head back in the spring to breed. So they look pretty special here. It's a bit sexist, this actually. I've got four male ducks there, but generally with ducks, the females are generally a lot sort of dowdier, because they may be spending more time sat on the nest, so they want to be more sort of camouflage, and the males are just show offs, to be honest, but sort of pretty spectacular. So again, if you get down on the Severn Estuary, there's sort of nationally and internationally important numbers of shoveler and pintail and widgeon spend the autumn winter down there. And also it's inland as well, places like Llandegfed Reservoir, and there's the Nedden wetlands near Caldecott, and very sort of smaller sort of ponds and lakes. They're all worth visiting. They'll all have their little groups of sort of ducks appearing about this time of year. Oh, I've gone too far. How do I go backwards? I can't actually see the chat now, Larry. Are there any questions at all?
Nothing on the chat.
Righty-ho, thank you very much. So sort of on to fungi. I think everyone's probably aware that autumn's the time for fungi. Sort of in the summer, everything's a bit too hot, a bit too dry. Fungi sort of don't like that. They sort of like it to be not too cold, they like it to be sort of damp and sort of a bit sort of humid. And sort of autumn is just the time when there's still a bit of warmth in the air, but it's nice and damp. And this is when all the fungi appear. Obviously, the fungi are with us all year round, but they're hidden under the ground. So if you think of all the fungi you actually see as almost like it's like the fruiting bodies. So it's like, you know, the apples of a tree, the berries on a hawthorn bush. The actual fungi we see is just really the fruiting body. So the fungi is actually with us all year round, but it's in autumn when it sort of appears. So it's too dry in the summer, and generally when you get the first frosts, they're quite delicate. The fungi in the first frosts sort of break down the tissues and they disappear. So probably from September, October into early November is the time to go looking for fungi. At the moment, it's obviously a horrible day today, but it's still quite mild. So this is the kind of weather that really brings the fungi out. So it's probably worth going on a bit of a fungi foray in the next few weeks, I dare say, which will bring me on to an event where we're running quite soon. There's a selection of sort of fungi that could be out and about. I can't remember what half of these are called, to be honest. I'm not really so up on the fungi, but it's kind of like a little puffball up in the top left, and then it's an earth star, and then kind of things that looks like little white hands. I can't remember what that was called. You got more puffballs up in the top right. Then we got one of our wax caps there in the sort of middle left, the crimson wax cap, and then there's, as well as all these fungi that grow out of the ground, there's obviously all these sort of plate fungi that grow out of trees, and you've got little clubs there. And then so in the middle, next to the white clubs, is there something called candle snuff that grows out of sort of rotten trunks. Then you got another sort of bracket fungus, some tiny little parasols, and then there's one on the bottom left I shouldn't have put in there. That isn't an autumn fungus. That's one of the sort of rarer funguses that actually comes out in the spring. That's called bog beacon. And that grows out of really boggy areas. That one was in Cledden Bog, which I don't recommend you try and walk over, because I think the last time I walked across there, I fell over about 6 times. But generally, most of the fungi, this is the time of year. And then in the middle, you've got the sort of real classic sort of toadstool that you might have a gnome sat on top, or a fairy. And you've got some of that sort of black long ones the bottom that's called an earth tongue. Looks like a little tongue coming out of the ground. And then there's a shaggy ink cap, which that's sort of in its prime there, but when it starts to go over, it all just sort of starts to dissolve into kind of a black ink. And then right in the bottom right hand corner, slightly dodgy looking one, that's a stinkhorn, which you'll smell that before you see it. It incredibly smells like sort of rotting flesh, and that sort of obviously attracts in the insects, which are good for spreading its spores. But I always get a little bit worried when I sort of smell that if I'm out sort of walking in the woods. I'm a bit worried what I might find, and it's a relief to find it's just some fungus. But my favorite kind of autumn fungus is the wax caps. So some of you may have visited our Pentwyn Farm Reserve, or our Brockwells Meadows Reserve, or our New Grove Meadows Reserve, which are all really well known as being sort of hay meadows, full of all huge variety of colourful flowers during sort of May, June, July. But not so many people visit these sites in sort of September, October, early November. And that's sort of when there's this second sort of flush of colour and sort of interest. So if you went to these sites in August, after you've took the hay cut, there's probably not much to see. But yeah, you get to this time of year and a bit later into October, and all of a sudden there's a second load of colour with all these wax caps that appear. So these are real sort of classic indicators of sort of unimproved grasslands, sort of really, really good sort of grassland that hasn't been ploughed, it hasn't had fertilizers put on, pesticides, definitely not fungicides, all that kind of thing. So if you start to see all these different fungus, it's a real good indicator you're in a real quality old grassland. And if you did see these, it'd probably be worth going back next June or July, because I bet it'd be full of wildflowers then, and all the sort of insects that go along with them. And you really do get a great selection of colors. You've got sort of golden wax caps there. You've got the red ones on the top, they're crimson wax caps, and then you got a scarlet wax cap down the bottom left. The one in the middle on the bottom is the green one, is a parrot wax cap, sort of so called because well, it's sort of green, I suppose, a bit like some parrots. Not all parrots are green. Sort of the middle line is one in from the left is meadow wax cap, and then the white one on the middle line is snowy wax cap. There's sort of all sorts, and you can kind of identify them a bit by their colours, but there's sort of lots more to it. They all have distinctive scents. There's some that smell like cedar wood, and then some of them have sort of greasy caps, some of them have dry caps, some have kind of a fibrous cap. There's all sorts of different ways to sort of tell them apart. And I think there might be about 50 species of wax cap, and sort of the UK is probably the best place in the world for these wax caps, and probably Wales may possibly be the best country in the world for these wax caps. And not wishing to blow Gwent's own trumpet, but probably South Wales is probably just about the best place in the world for these wax cap fungi. So we have a real responsibility for them, and they're sort of well worth going out and seeing, because certainly at New Grove I've been there, and there's just all sorts of colours everywhere, dotted everywhere. And it's and this is just the wax caps. You have all these clubs and spindles and earth tongues and various other sort of fungi all at the same time. And I should point out the fungi that's in the top right, that's the pink one. That's the pink wax cap, or ballerina wax cap, and that is one of our 10 species that we're particularly focusing on for the next 10 years or so. Oh, I'm gonna have a look in the chat, see what we got there. Oh, there we go. There's 30 odd species of wax cap in Ian's local Triplosia at Cwmglo in Merthyr Tydfil. We'll forgive that for being outside of Gwent, but yeah, that's obviously Cwmglo's obviously a fantastic site there. So yeah, as Ian says, there's like 30 odd species there. There's probably 30 odd species maybe at New Grove, and they're doing lots of eDNA work on them at the moment as well. Sort of looking at their genetic sequences, and they're actually finding out there's even more species that are getting divided up, which kind of blows my mind a bit. But we have been doing quite a bit of eDNA work ourselves on fungi, because sort of we're focusing on them here because obviously they sort of appear in the autumn, so you can only really survey for them in a very small sort of time period. But last year we went out in May and collected loads of soil samples from lots of sites. Didn't see a single bit of fungus, but we collected these soil samples and we sent them off to Aberystwyth University, who did all fancy stuff in their fancy sequencing machines, and then ran it through all their computers, and came back, and there was we discovered some absolutely amazing sites which we didn't even know there was any. We kind of knew the habitat looped, right, but no one had ever looped at the right time of year, or maybe people had gone along. But if you have a particularly dry period or particularly wet period, or it gets cold early in the autumn, you can easily miss them. So we discovered some sites we didn't even know they had, and they had, just from collecting about 30 little Smarties tubes worth of soil from the site, we identified maybe 15 different wax cap species. So it'd be great to go along to these sites. Now we've identified these sites from doing eDNA, we could then go along at the correct time of year and just see just what diversity there is there. But obviously it helps. Now we know these sites exist. We're giving advice to all the landowners, and they can, obviously manage their sites. Obviously they're managing their sites great as it is, but they can be aware that these things are there, and sort of make sure they don't do anything that could possibly damage them. There's another thing there in the chat. I tried to photograph some very bright wax a few years ago, but it was so bright, almost fluorescent, that the camera couldn't capture the color. Yeah, it can be quite tricky photographing the wax caps, because if you put a flash on, like you can see, like the parrot wax cap down at the bottom, some of them have really shiny sort of tops, and it can be sort of almost reflect sort of back on you. So it can be quite useful to maybe photograph them with a flash, but put a sort of filter over the flash. A friend of mine just has a thing he's cut out of a milk carton that he just puts over the flash, and it just kind of just diffuses it, and sort of you can pick up the colors, but the flash doesn't sort of overpower it, and you get you don't pick up the colors so good. But obviously if you saw these wax caps a few years ago, it's always worth getting your records sent in to the local records centre, because we're very, very interested to know sort of where all these wax cap sites are, so we can sort of protect them. I think I was mentioning our 10 species that we're particularly focusing on up until 2030. So I'm going to struggle to remember them all, but there's nightjar, dipper, barn owl, water vole, pine martin, adder, shrill carder bee, grayling, probably something else I've missed, hedgehog, probably something else I've missed out. But anyway, the point is, one of them is the pink wax cap, is one of our sort of 10 species. So all these 10 species we've picked because we don't just want to protect that one species. They sort of represent sort of a good quality habitat that we want to sort of preserve. So we've picked the pink wax cap because if we can find the sites where that is, we know that's going to be a great grassland. If you preserve that, you'll be preserving all these other fungi species, and there'll be all the other flowers that appear in spring and summer, and then all the insects that go along with that, then all the birds and mammals that are preying on these insects. So we're particularly interested to find out where the pink wax caps are in Gwent. So if anybody happens to see any pink wax caps this autumn, we'd love to sort of hear about it. You can either message us, or probably even better, if you send your records into the local record centre, which is Subrek, and we can pick up the records from there. Because once we know where these sites are, we can make sure they get sort of some level of protection. I was going to mention an event we've got also sponsored, well, funded by Resilient Communities Fund. We have a grassland fungi, or basically a waxcap fungi walk on the 26th of October. I think that's a Thursday at our New Grove Meadows Reserve. So details of that are up on our website. So if anyone would like to come along on that, I'll be leading it, but we'll have at least 2 other people coming along who know a lot more than me. So I can sort of point a few things out, but they're the real experts. So we'll be really fortunate to have some real sort of fungi experts along with us on the day, people who've sort of written a book about grassland fungi. So they'll be able to identify everything. So if you're interested in knowing more about grassland fungi, then please sign up for that. I think it's limited to 30 spaces. So if you want to come on that, book on quite soon. Gone too far. So that's sort of the fungi, but it isn't quite all over for our flowers and insects. There's still quite a few are sort of hanging on. The good thing is all the flowers that have died, they'll all be back next year. That's the nice thing of it. You have autumn, you have winter, but it's reassuring to know spring will be coming around. They're all back. There's some that really sort of specialize in the autumn. Is autumn gentian, which is quite a rare plant, but we do get it sort of here in Gwent. There's autumn ladies' tresses. I'll talk a bit more about these when we come to photographs of them. And sort of likewise, there's lots of our plants have disappeared. Lots of the insects disappear. If there's no flowers for them to get their nectar from, and it's all a bit cold, then obviously they've got to disappear. But they all have different strategies of how to sort of get through the autumn and winter. Some will spend it as eggs, some will spend it as caterpillars, some will spend it as pupae, and some of them actually the adults sort of hibernate. But if there's warm days, there's still quite a few on the wing. Like today was an awful day, but when I came back from work today and pulled on my drive, I have an enormous ivy sort of bush which I leave, and that was absolutely coated in insects today, despite the fact that it was like 40-mile-an-hour winds, had been raining. All the insects were concentrated just on this ivy, because that was one of the few things that was still flowering. So here we sort of have on the left-hand side that autumn gentian, which is quite a rare plant sort of here in Gwent, but I've seen it on, where have I seen it? I've seen it in Black Rock Quarry in the Clydach Gorge, and I've seen it up on Gilwern Hill. So you've got to get sort of out in the hills a bit to see it, but really nice plant, worth seeing. And then in the middle, autumn ladies' tresses, which is an orchid. Obviously, all our other orchids stopped flowering a long time ago, but the autumn ladies' tresses should still be flowering. Apparently, it used to be on our Brockwells Meadows Reserve, and we haven't seen it there for, I don't know, 25 years maybe. So there's a challenge for somebody. If you want to go down to Brockwells Meadows and see if you can find it for us, because obviously people visit reserves like that when all the flowers are out, but people don't tend to go there very often this time of year. So it may still be there. It'd be great if someone could re-find it. And then top right here, Devil's Bit scabious. I've got a load of that in there. I was looking out the window there to see it in my garden, and it's pitch dark now. But I've got a load of that growing in my garden. That really is, the insects absolutely love that this time of year. And then I think I mentioned the ivy. That's one of the few things that's really at the peak of its flowering sort of this time of year, which is really important for, as I said, I pulled up the drive and it was covered in bees and wasps and hoverflies. There was all sorts on it when I got home from work today. And there's an ivy mining bee which really specializes in it. In fact, I was sent there's a lady, I'm not sure where she is in Gwent, but every year her ivy mining bees all appear almost on exactly the same day in September, and she sends me photographs and videos of them every year. So it was just yesterday I received this year's photographs and videos, which is great to see. And it's lovely how it's quite reassuring how she manages her garden nicely, and sure as clockwork, she looks after her garden, and these mining bees come back every year. But if you didn't have the ivy, lots of people like to cut down the ivy, and it can do maybe a bit of damage to your brickwork. But if you can leave some ivy in your garden, then you know it's essential for certain species of insect this time of year. And because the ivy flowers so late, it produces its fruit so late. So all the fruit we saw earlier, that's all there in the autumn, but the ivy berries are sort of in the winter and even into sort of early spring. So they're sort of providing valuable sort of food resources for our birds really late into winter. So a bit of ivy's great, as well as the birds put their nests in there in spring and the bats roost behind it. So fantastic plant, the ivy, really. And then here's a few of our sort of insects which are still knocking about. So we've got and they're both, you can both see they're enjoying autumn there. They've got the red admiral there, which a lot of our red admirals actually migrate up to us from from Europe, which is a bit mad to think butterflies managing to do that, but yet they managed to do so. It's about peak sort of late summer, early autumn's peaks of the time for the red admirals. And then you can see we've got a comma here as well on the right hand side. You can see the little punctuation mark on its underwing, enjoying some sort of blackberries there. So doesn't necessarily need the flowers this time of year. They can, you know, suck up the juice out of their sort of rotting blackberries. And you can see just how well adapted the comma is for autumn and for hibernating, because you know, when it's got its wings up like that, it looks, you know, perfectly like a dead sort of autumn leaf. So there's 5 of our butterfly species will actually hibernate, spend the winter as an adult. So we've got small tortoiseshells, peacocks, red admirals, commas, and brimstone butterflies are our 5 that sort of hibernate. So you may see all of them still on the wing now, and then before it gets too cold, they will hibernate somewhere. Sort of quite often you might find them in like your sheds, or some of them even try and come inside your house to hibernate, but obviously that's no good. It's going to be too warm. But yeah, if they get in your shed or whatever, they'll spend the winter, and then be obviously the first butterflies on the wing in the spring then, or even a sort of late winter if you get a nice warm day. And then we've gone past sort of the peak sort of dragonfly season, but there's still a few on the wing. I think it always makes it easier this time of year because we've got quite a lot of species. There's 30 odd species of dragonfly and damselfly and Gwent, but there's could be maybe just 3 different species probably likely on the wing now, maybe a few others hanging on. But generally this time of year, if you see a dragonfly, it's either going to be a southern hawker up in the top left, or the main big picture, a migrant hawker, or the bottom left, the red one there, a common darter. So these will sort of hang on really until you get the first frost. So particularly like the common darter, you can maybe still see them into November. So yeah, they're still very much a feature of the autumn, these 3 species of dragonfly. And then there's still moths about. Still be quite good. Yeah, people put out their moth traps. I don't know if any of you do your moth trapping. I know Larry had a moth trap out over the weekend and reported it was rubbish, but it doesn't necessarily need to be rubbish this time of year. Obviously, if it gets cold, then you know the moths won't be flying. But if it's still warm and it's not raining too much, not too windy, you'll still get the moths out. And like the one on the left here is actually called an autumn thorn. You get various thorns throughout the year. It's not an autumn thorn, it's a September thorn, sorry. So obviously that's very much a specialist for this time of year. There's also an August thorn, but September thorn this time of year. They also get a canary-shouldered thorn this time of year. And on the right here is an autumnal rustic. So there's various sort of moth species that really specialize in coming out this time of year. And a lot of these really like to get their nectar from sort of ivy after dark as well. So even if you haven't got a moth trap, if you've got ivy in your garden, if you go out and just shine a torch on the ivy flowers this time of year, quite often you can see quite a few of these autumnal moth species sort of flying about. And then there's a real sort of, quite a lot of the autumnal moths are a bit duller looking because they kind of, I kind of feel they want to maybe blend in more of the dying autumn leaves, but there's still some that are really, really pretty. And this is the time of year you get all the sallows appear. So on the left here, you've got a common sallow, and in the middle, there's a pink barred sallow, and on the right, a centre barred sallow. So these are all sort of classic autumn moths, and they're really, particularly the pink barred sallow is really, really pretty moth. So if you do moth trapping, it's well worth trapping into September and October, because otherwise you'd miss out on these sort of species. And now's the time of year for getting sort of migrants as well. Again, it seems quite weird that there'd be moths migrating sort of coming up from the continent, but there are, and that now's sort of the time of year for getting some of the rare migrant moths as well. So again, it's worth sticking your moth trap out if the weather isn't too bad. And then there's also some of the real sort of classics this time of year. There's the red underwing, which is a real big moth. Looks quite dull looking until it moves its forewings a bit, and then it flashes this red underneath, obviously gives it its name. And then on the right here, another classic sort of autumn moth that really well camouflaged with sort of green lichen, which is the Merveille de Jour, which is a very grand French name, which sort of translates as marvel of the day, and a real beauty. So I'd never seen one of these before, but I kept moth trapping into late October last year just to make sure I sort of caught one of these, and I think I had 6 or 7 in the trap one night. So people don't see them all that often, because maybe people start looking for moths quite late on in the season. But if you keep on trapping, there's all these beauties to be had. But something else happens in the autumn. Obviously, some things migrate away, some things sort of die, some things sort of just plants die down, but they come up again next year. But some things sort of properly sort of hibernate. So some of these are creatures that can't sort of leave us for the winter, like hedgehogs. They can't sort of suddenly sprout wings. I'd like to have a hedgehog grew wings. That'd be amazing. Pulled all its spines in and grew little wings and flew off. But obviously they're kind of stuck with us for the winter, and they very much like eating sort of slugs, snails, insects. And obviously the slugs, snails, insects, they disappear for the winter. So there's nothing for the hedgehog to eat. So the hedgehog sort of has to hibernate, as do our bats. A few of our bats may possibly migrate, but most of our bats stay with us. So again, they're all our bat species. We got 18 species in the UK, 15 of those species in Gwent. So we do really well for bats in Gwent, but they've all got to hibernate. Again, there's those 5 butterfly species I mentioned, and our dormice as well. There's probably plenty of food for dormice over the winter, but it just they're very small, and it's, if you're small and it's cold, you sort of suffer. So they go into hibernation. So I think dormice maybe spend 5 months of their year sort of sleeping. So maybe late October they'll sort of go into hibernation. But all these things that hibernate, they have to make sure they eat a lot. So in this time of plenty now, they've got to be really feeding their faces, because they may not eat again over the winter. Although quite often, a lot of these species that do hibernate do actually wake up for the odd day in the winter, like bats. If you've got a mild day in the winter, they will perhaps wake up, go out, forage for a bit. But generally, there's not enough insects about, so they'll sort of stay in hibernation, not appear again until the next spring. So here we got a pipistrelle bat, and we got a hedgehog here. This hedgehog was actually on January the 1st. So that was up and out and about when it really should have been hibernating, but it was sort of very mild. So maybe it had come out of hibernation and was having a little nose about, and then hopefully it would find somewhere to get back to sleep. But if our winters are too mild, some of these species can struggle. You might, I think with dormice, they do better if you have a really hard winter, because otherwise they might wake up but not be quite warm enough for them to properly feed. So generally they want to go into a deep sleep and then sleep throughout the winter and then wake up and hopefully they've got enough reserves to get them through, and then come out in spring when there's lots of stuff to eat. And then we got the brimstone butterfly here on the right, which is one of our 5 species that hibernates. And generally, this is probably the first butterfly species I see in the spring, because it tends to be it hibernates, and then first kind of bit of warmth in February, back on the wing again, kind of thing. And it's the brimstone that they think whether the term butterfly came from. There's 2 schools of thought. Some people think it was like flutterbies, and then it became butterflies. But another school of thought is they're called butterflies because they're sort of flies, and they were the color of butter, and it's the brimstone. It's kind of butter color, so that's where the butterfly gets its name from. Oh, blimey, I've got to the end already. I bet I've gone through this far too quickly tonight. Maybe I haven't. Look at that. 5 to 8. So there's I'm going to quickly do the hard sell on everybody. I dare say probably all of you are Gwent Wildlife Trust members, but if you're not, then please consider joining us. Obviously, it helps us care for our reserves, campaign against damaging developments, doing all our survey for rare and endangered species, educating children and adults alike, helping fund us put on events like this. So if anyone isn't a member, then please consider joining. Or if you know somebody who isn't a member, then get them in a headlock or something and persuade them to be members. Or, oh, I'm going to mention Christmas now. I shouldn't mention Christmas, but as we are in autumn, then we're approaching it kind of. Obviously, it's a great Christmas gift as well. So if you're struggling for a Christmas gift for somebody, then membership to Gwent Wildlife Trust would be a great Christmas gift. So there we go. Thank you very much. Oh, and we've had this discussion earlier, but if you haven't already, then just about now, or maybe you want to leave it till maybe the berries and seeds are sort of a little they're sort of running out. But around about now, in the next month or so, it's a great time to start feeding your garden birds. So there we go. That is it. But oh, there's something in the chat. Oh, just a thank you. That's quite all right. Now, if there's any more questions, we've obviously got a little bit of time. If there are any questions, please fire them up now. If not, I'm going to disappear. Oh, there we go. I was just about to run off as well, but yeah, that's great. A few questions all good. Oh, just somebody else saying thank you. That's quite all right. That's quite all right as well. That's quite all right as well. Thank you very much, everybody, for saying thank you. That's great, and thanks for all coming along, because it's always great if people come along. It sort of makes it all worthwhile. And obviously, so we got that fungi walk coming up, so it'd be great to see some people. I know Ian's coming along on that fungi walk already, so that's great. But if anyone else would like to come along, that'd be great. And if anyone's got any ideas for any other sort of talks they'd maybe like to hear over the winter, we have all our sort of regional groups. We have the US group, the Abergavenny group, the Chepstow group, and the Monmouth group, and they have series of talks in person over the winter. So I think from October through to March. So if you're not a member of any of those groups, we do have lots of talks going on, sort of once a month kind of thing. But hopefully we'll put on some on Zoom as well for people who maybe don't want to go out on these cold winter nights. So if anybody has any idea of talks, you can put them in the chat now, or you can just, I think you all have my email address. Any idea of talks, just drop them my way, and we'll see if we can put on a few more talks over the winter. But if there's no more questions, I shall say thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and enjoy all the wildlife this autumn in Gwent. Thank you very much. Cheerio, bye.